Welcome to the Healing Bitch podcast. I'm Jackie Ortez, a psychic medium that has a penchant for all things spiritual. During this time with me, we will explore the world of energy and how it affects us all. Each podcast will address a question submitted from my listeners that I feel I have the authority to answer. So get comfy, throw on your headphones, and let's see what happens. Hey, every guys. I never do that. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Healing Bitch podcast. We have Ray Seti yet again, becoming my favorite guest, absolutely, of the podcast. And we're going to talk about astrology again today. He's got some stuff up his sleeve to be talking about. Yeah, so
to be revealed.
Take it away.
Do you remember, actually one thing, I always emphasize how we're really intended to use these tools as part of our navigation of this human experience. And it always amazes me how it has been in the past been discredited. Although I do believe that as we move forward, these understandings will be much more embraced.
Right.
There are depictions of astrology everywhere that you look, throughout time. I remember one of the first times I went to Italy was in the mid 90s. And I went to, I think it was St. Peter's Basilica, and there's a depiction on the ceiling of an astrological wheel. And isn't it interesting how, conventional religion tells us that we need to stay away from all of this because it's, the work of the devil and everything. But it's right there in plain sight.
It's true. If you really think about it, in like the ceilings of cathedrals and the ceilings of everything, there's always like little stars,
of course,
and
absolutely.
then the constellations, and even the whole of Grand Central Station.
That's right. Yeah, there
in
you
New
go.
York City.
That's right. I don't know if you remember. I can't remember what year it was. I think it was around 2010, maybe around that time, when there was this debacle about the 13th sign. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
All right. A lot of what was coming out really was misinformation. There's a difference between the constellations and the signs. Now, the constellations and what they were referring to at that time was a constellation, which the constellations of the zodiac, if you will, if you look at them in the sky, one, they're not necessarily equal in length, so they're not evenly divided, you see. That 13th, and if you observe their movement as well as the sun and the moon and all the planets, they follow a specific line. It's referred to as the ecliptic, and I'm keeping it very simple. That 13th sign that they were referring to, one, it really was a constellation and not a sign, and I'll explain the difference between the two. That was not necessarily in that alignment that the constellations of the zodiac follow. So right there, that's telling you something's a little bit off. And, everybody was concerned, what's my sign? Am I really the sign that I think I am, this, that, and the other? No. In astrology, we use what's referred to as the tropical zodiac, all right? The constellations are what's connected to the sidereal zodiac. So there's a difference there, and I'm going to explain it. Now, the tropical zodiac that we use conventionally as Western astrologers is measured by the position of the sun as it moves throughout the calendar year. And it's referred to as the tropical zodiac because it's part of the point of reference that is used are the tropics of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. And you understand, all right? At the Tropic of Cancer in the northern hemisphere is where the sun is at the highest point in the summer time frame on the summer solstice.
Okay.
I hope I'm explaining this correctly.
Well, I mean, you could explain it as correctly as you can. I'm just listening.
Okay. Well, I don't want to misinform.
No.
And the Tropic of Capricorn is when the sun is at the highest position in the sky in the southern hemisphere, which is at the winter solstice, and northern and the summer solstice. Okay. That is a point of reference. And the other 2 points are the vernal equinox, which is the spring. Yeah. And the autumn equinox, which is in the fall. And that is divided into 12 equal segments based on the position of the sun in the sky.
That makes sense.
All right. Now, if you follow the position of the sun as it appears against the constellations, it's not the same. It's not, like, for example, right now, the sun is in, oh my God, I'm brain farting. The sun is in Pisces.
Yeah.
But it may be if you look at it in the sky, in the constellation of Aquarius, and not the sign of Pisces.
Right.
You see how that works there?
Yes.
So our astrological charts are based on those positions of the sun along the sky and how it's divided equally throughout the year.
That actually made sense to me.
Good. But what I'm emphasizing is how astrology, there are these, whatever they are, because I think at that time it was an astronomer, not an astrologer, who put this out there. Oh, there's a 13th sign, whatever, and all of this doesn't make any sense, and it has been trying to be discredited.
Yeah.
But that's just like a very simple explanation how Western astrology that we use as the tropical zodiac and apply it to the charts that we use.
Did they actually go as far as giving the 13th sign a name?
Yeah, there is a name. It begins with an O. I forget what it's called.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah. And if you look at it, like I said, it doesn't follow the line, what's referred to as the ecliptic, of how the constellations follow.
Yeah.
You see? Mm-hmm. And another thing, remember when Pluto was downgraded?
Yeah.
I remember someone coming to me and asking me, "Oh, now that Pluto is, declassified, does it have any value? Does it no longer have any value in astrology?"
Who? First of all, who has the authority
exactly
to declassify a planet?
Yeah, and my my response to that was, it's kind of like that Shakespearean quote: "Would a rose by any other name smell less sweet?"
Yeah.
Regardless of how it's classified or how it's labeled, it's still going to have a vibrational frequency, density, matter, and all that.
Yeah. So
stuff.
it still plays a part in the whole
Correct.
thing.
Yeah. And and again, what I'm emphasizing is how all of this is how many try to discredit all of this, because when we use all this, they're really tools to empower ourselves. That's what it's really all about. That's part of the reason why I began this journey is to offer another the understanding of these tools, to empower themselves, and that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, and if you really think about it. They say that I've said this before, but the billionaires and heads of company actually use astrology to lead when to do things.
And if you actually look to see when they do certain things, it always coincides with some significant astrological event. I know, isn't that something?
It's something.
But you know what? We will be finding out a lot more about, one, really how all this works and how it's very much intended to be part of our human experiences. And I might have mentioned this once before, but I remember one of the first observations that I made when I began my studies of astrology is that astrology is geocentric and not heliocentric.
No, I don't think you mentioned that because I would have remembered being confused by that.
Yeah. Well, do you know? All right.
I don't know what that means.
And I will explain. Heliocentric means that the sun is the center of it all and everything revolves around the sun.
Okay.
Geocentric infers that the earth is stationary and everything revolves around it in the heavens.
And which one is astrology?
Geocentric, meaning the earth is stationary and centered, and everything else above is moving around it.
But weren't we taught that the earth moves?
Of course. And how do we know that?
I don't know.
Exactly. We're only taught that because that's what we're told.
Was it taught associated to the concept of gravity?
I believe that was a part of the whole experience.
Okay.
But remember, unless we're, I always say, I'm not here to tell anyone what they should or should not believe. That's not what I'm here to do. I will offer my understandings and suggestions and inspire those to just kind of, keep it all in the realm of possibility.
Yeah,
just
see what feels good to you.
Correct. And just observe these as possibilities.
Yeah.
Personally, I've never been out in space and observed anything from afar.
Would you go out in space if you had the option?
Probably not.
No, I wouldn't either.
No, I think that would freak me out.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Me too.
So, I've never observed it from afar.
Yeah. No, all we've seen are images. And I don't think I've ever actually seen like a video or an image of the Earth actually moving or revolving or...
I mean, I believe that when they, and I will say this with some caution, when they allegedly landed on the moon, that they had a video of the Earth rising above the moon's horizon or whatever. But if, and I always point this out, if you ever look at any of those images, it's against the black backdrop.
Yeah.
There's no stars. Look at all the images that they show us.
I know. This has been actually brought up to me by friends before. And there are definitely things that I'm like, huh. And I was like, I'm just going to leave the moon landing. That's not another thing I need to think about.
Sure.
Question.
Of course.
Of But I understand because I
yeah.
have heard this before
Yeah.
by many people.
You know, look at people that take photographs of the sky at night when you see a gazillion stars.
Yeah. You would, of course, see them if you were
Even
in
more
space.
if you were in
so
space.
far. Yeah,
So
that's
again,
true. That's valid.
I'm not trying to discredit anything. I just, you know what, plant these little seeds of, you know, thought-provoking ideas and suggest everyone to just explore.
And
do the research.
And that's such a great way to approach it because then we're putting the power in the individual person's hands.
And that's what this is
Instead
about.
of saying,
Yeah.
that's the whole part of our existence is to guide people to come into their own power.
Come into their own. And, you know, conventional, you know, education doesn't necessarily do that.
No.
It tells you what to believe. My suggestion is I offer my understandings based upon my experiences and not what I'm taught. I mean, I know astrology works because I've applied like these cycles of experience in my own life first. And my observations, how, okay, on a given day or in a given season, how certain influences are at play and how it's all playing itself out.
Yeah.
That's how I understand and know that this works. But I'm not going to try to convince anybody that this works.
No.
I also know the feedback that I get from other people as well.
Yeah, I could imagine because if you do, as part of your services, you do like a whole year scope or like what do you do?
When a client comes to me, I look to see what is at play in a given time. And it really is dependent upon what is significant over the course of a few months, a year or so. It's really dependent upon what is being activated and energized and how long. I don't have like a preconceived notion of like, oh, I'm going to give them like a 90-day forecast or a year and a half forecast. It's really dependent upon what's going on astrologically with the client at the time that they're sitting with me.
Yeah. So I have an app called The Pattern.
Okay.
And I put my information in it like years ago, and it pops up like the significant periods of my life that I'm in. And I have found it to be actually pretty accurate, except for the one thing, because now that I'm moving now, it told me a year ago I was supposed to be moving. Or it was like a year ago. Well, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. No, now that I think about it, it told me between last February and November that I was going to make a decision about my home, and that's when I was thinking of moving. Right. So never mind.
You know, I mean, I do suggest to just kind of take all of that with a grain
of
salt.
Yes, I'm not like, oh my God, I need to move in the 6 periods of my life because we all have free will.
Yeah.
We do.
Well,
not
that's
have
another
to...
thing as well. You know, especially whenever I meet with a client, especially if it's the first time that I'm sitting with a client, I will always, the first thing that I will address is that you have a free will. How all of this is going to play out is based upon your choices, the energy that you put out there.
Yes.
You know, this astrology doesn't have power over us. It's understanding how to work with the cycles of experience.
Yeah.
You know, there are what are conventionally referred to as negative and positive alignments, aspects, whatever. But how something will ultimately play out is dependent upon the energy whatever energy we're projecting at that certain moments. So we can bring the form either the negative potential of an alignment or the positive potential, meaning favorable or adverse.
Right.
It's all dependent upon our free will and what we're putting out there at any given time. You know, I also like to emphasize that whenever we look ahead, nothing's absolute. Nothing's guaranteed. Nothing's written in stone. We look to the possibilities. And for me anyway, when I sit with a client, I offer suggestions how to make the most of the experience. Doesn't mean that there aren't going to be challenges, but also too, I see those experiences not necessarily as challenges, but as opportunities. And if we could observe all of these experiences from that perspective of opportunity, then we can make the most of any given experience.
Yeah, and with challenges, there's always the lessons that you learn going forward that you can use for next time you're in that situation. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and how it's all going to play out, again, it's based upon our free will. Mm-hmm. We can make it much more difficult, or we can
we can resist.
We can resist and make it more difficult, or we can just welcome and really say, okay, you know what? I'm going to make the most of this and know that I have the power to rise above.
Yeah, and I was saying this to my mom yesterday. There's this person called Brene Brown, and have you ever heard of her?
I don't think so.
She talks about courage and how to have more courage in life. And one of the big things she said was there is never being brave or having courage without an equal amount of fear. Yeah. So moving through everything in a courage and brave way. Yeah.
You know, this isn't my quote, but I remember many years ago hearing a phrase to embrace fear as a tailwind and not a headwind. Mm-hmm. You see?
Yeah.
Because that will propel you forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much fear when you're doing new things.
Of course, absolutely.
Of course, there has to be. I feel like if there isn't, then you're not realistically thinking, or you're not grounded enough to be like seeing the whole thing. But anyhow,
yeah. But you know what? Also, too, you want to transmute that fear from anxiety to excitement.
Yes.
And then it's a completely different experience,
yes,
or rather, completely different outcome to the experience.
Yeah, exactly. So I know you have some points, but I have a quick question for you with astrology. So I've never looked into it, but what's the difference between and if this is a big explanation, just shorten it, Vedic astrology.
Okay.
And like the Western astrology.
I'm not completely familiar with Vedic astrology, so I don't know if I'm really qualified to answer that, because I'm just really not that familiar with it.
Yeah.
But I will say this from what I do understand. The Vedic astrologer, we've talked about how in the chart we have a rising sign. All right, the rising sign, that's one of the three significant components that offer insights to our personalities. The sun sign, the moon sign, and the rising sign. I understand, from what I understand, in Vedic astrology, they place all the attention on the rising sign.
I think that sounds familiar.
Yeah, that's the significant focal point of the astrological chart.
Okay.
Indians from India, they use it, and I was shared from someone who's Indian that they actually, when a child is in utero, it's not until the child is born that they will decide the name of the child based on its rising sign of its astrological chart.
That's interesting.
I hope I shared that. So
do they have like a list of names for each?
I believe they might. Well, actually, it's amazing that everything under heaven and earth, if you want to use that term, is connected to astrology in some sort of way. Yeah. Everything is ruled by astrology, including names. I couldn't tell you offhand, like for example, what your name is connected to. But I
was hoping you could.
But there are connections to all of that. So, in Vedic astrology, you in the Indian cultures, you are assigned an astrologer from birth.
I want that.
Yeah.
That would be so fun.
Yeah. So, and that's just an example how certain cultures give such credibility to astrology.
Yeah. It's really interesting when you think about it.
And it's unfortunate how, and I've always said how unless you're really a seasoned trained astrologer, you don't understand how much is actually involved when you construct an astrological chart for an individual. Because you're also, I was on the other day, because I'll do either phone or in-person sessions. I was with a client on the phone and I had like all these charts all over me. And she asked me a question. I'm like, I'm going through like 10 different charts here trying to figure out, what I need to say to this person. What we look at.
That's intense.
When we're preparing ourselves to really sit with someone. Mm-hmm. So, sometimes there's like 10 different charts you're looking at to arrive at the conclusions that you need to conclude.
That's so That's so interesting. Did I ever tell you that for my close friends, for their kids' first birthday, I give them
nice.
a book that has their whole birth chart and all the explanations
cool
because
is
I
that?
feel like it's a lifelong gift.
Of course it is.
It's something they can refer to.
Yep.
And it's also like a little guide for what their personality is going to be and like the parenting guide, you know?
Yep.
So I think I've only done it 3 times at this point. But yeah, on the first birthday for
Is that
like
cool? Yeah, that's a great gift.
yeah, I'm just
That
like,
is a great gift.
here you go. Read about your kid. Like the other
that's
day
a
I was
great
at my
gift.
friend's house and she's like, I'm not sure about like why my daughter's like this. I'm like, did you read her book? Just refer to her book.
You know, I had it was probably in the early 90s, one of my this client is actually still with me to this day since the early 90s. And one of the main reasons that she had reached out to me, she was concerned about her daughter who was just born. I think her daughter was just a few months at the time. And she was concerned because the medical profession was trying to convince her that her daughter had some sort of a disability, like some type of like a mental disorder, if you want to refer to it as such. You know, and when I looked at the chart, I didn't observe that. What I observed was someone who had a high level of intelligence.
Which could be mistaken, especially around that time.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Yes. You know, I mean, we can go down a whole rabbit hole about what was going on at that time. However, though, I mean, her daughter is what might be considered to be somewhat autistic. However, she went through the mainstream school systems. She was never isolated or separated. She was very much integrated in a mainstream society. Went to college and is now a kindergarten teacher. She's a kindergarten teacher.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and also, too, you know, anyone, I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. Anyone who's labeled as such. You know, if you look at their astrological charts, what we observe is an individual with high levels, extraordinary levels of intelligence. That's
absolutely every single person that has had a classification that I've come across is extremely smart.
Yeah.
Extremely. And I heard something too that there's going to be more, I don't want to like, you know, but that there's going to be more children born with a higher level of intelligence in the coming
Well, I think
years.
it's already happening.
Yeah.
I think it's already especially on a spiritual level.
I feel like in like the past
charts.
9-10 years it's started to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, it's also kind of interesting too. If you look at the I should have brought some examples. If you look at an astrological chart of someone, for example, like Albert Einstein, who's a genius, and you look at an astrological chart of someone who has like an extreme, for example, or for lack of a better way, mental disorder, if you look at their two charts, which do you think would have the more complex chart?
Probably the intelligent person.
No.
Oh, it's the mental person.
The one with the mental imbalance, if you look at one of their charts, everything's like all over the place. It's
I guess
scattered.
It does make sense, yeah.
If you look at actually, I didn't think about this. Maybe next time I'll bring the charts. If you look at Albert Einstein's chart, it's very simple. It doesn't have a lot to it. But what is significant, or where the significant placements are, that's where the energies are the strongest. But it's so very simple. It's very, very simple.
That's cool.
Yeah. And it's a perfect example, one, how many times we make things a lot harder than what they are. And there's something to that simplicity.
Well, I think society has set us up for that, too.
Of course.
To make everything more, we need something for everything.
Yeah, it sets us up to fail.
Yeah, and not be independent. Yeah.
Correct. So we're relying on others. But then this is why we look at all of this.
Yeah.
To empower someone in knowing really what they're capable of achieving, creating, and being. Mm-hmm. I always say it's about the being and not the doing. If you're always doing, you're really not.
I always tell people that when they're like, my mind is always racing. I'm like, but are you like, how much are you doing during the day? Like, are you ever actually relaxing? They're like, but I can't relax. My mind is always going everywhere. I was like, yeah, because you're not used to it. You have to like train yourself to relax if you're already in that state.
But also, too, you know, when someone has those experiences where the mind is racing or running amok, if they allow themselves or would have the courage to really anchor and ground themselves,
Yeah, that's the other
there's
thing.
so much information and creativity that is being birthed in those moments.
Yeah.
It just, when you're not anchored and grounded, you're just all over the place, but it's a surge of energy.
Yeah, and I find that when people aren't anchored and grounded, they're too worried about all the business that's around them and not their own business.
Yeah, and that's just a convenient distraction.
Yeah,
You see?
I do.
Yeah, you do.
I do. I know. I tell people this all the time. I'm like, just like sit in silence and see what happens. Like, if you can't sit in silence, look outside and observe everything around you. If you can't do the silence, start with that and the grounding and everything. But it's just,
well, most people aren't comfortable with being within themselves and with themselves. You know, because then maybe you might discover something about yourself.
well, I know a lot of people that will discover a lot, and that's what I want them to do.
And that's why we do what we do. That's why we look at all of this.
Yeah, and discover what is truly for them still.
Yeah.
That's in their life.
Absolutely. You know, I'm finding it just in this last week, I had a couple of client sessions with individuals who are at an advanced stage, I'll say, but I'm finding that many, as such, are really coming into their own now.
Yes.
You notice
I
that?
love it. And you know, for years you're told that older people can't change, and it is
Absolutely not.
it is a choice. And
course
so
it is.
many more people are like looking around and yes, at an advanced stage, and they're like, what the hell happens? Like, how did my life become this?
I know, right?
And then they're actually like diving into their passions a little bit. It's
Absolutely.
beautiful.
Isn't it? It's extraordinary. It absolutely is. You know, I mean, I had a client, I think it was yesterday, you know, referred to as being in the 80s. I'm like, oh no, you know,
You're still here.
You're still here, but you know what? Now your life can begin. But it doesn't mean that their lives were insignificant leading up to that point.
Correct.
There's just the way that the energy is shifting now. Now, you know what, they have so much more that they can offer to others.
There is, and there's such a beautiful thing of living by example, no matter how old you are. So if you're like changing in your 80s, you're showing everybody that it's just never too late.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's kind of interesting. And at around 84 years, we have what's referred to as a Uranus return, you know, and that's all about awakening. And not everyone would have the awakening at that time. It's really dependent upon, you know, what you've chosen before coming into this embodiment, as it's going to apply to all these astrological configurations. Not everyone in their 80s. Some people might be leaving, you know, and that's good too. There's no wrong or right with any of this, you know. But I find it just so extraordinary how so many at that later stage are really embracing why they have come into this embodiment at this time, and there's no accident.
Yeah, and that's
There's
why
no
they
accident.
absolutely speak their minds with no
Yeah.
no filter.
No hesitation.
No hesitate. They're like, I've lived this
Good for
long.
them.
I'm just
I
going
know.
to speak when I want.
And they
It's not-
deserve it.
Yeah, they absolutely.
And they deserve it. But they have so much to offer, though.
I know.
So much to offer.
And there's so much knowledge from all the years to offer, and the thought of like, you know, all the guidance that they can offer, and it's just
You know, I was speaking to a client yesterday, and she was referring to her writing, and she kept saying to me that whenever she would write in the past, she felt as though she was writing for the future. And this is why I said to her, I said, you know what? Now all of that is going to be applied.
Yeah, now it's the
Because
present.
now it's the present.
Now it's the present that you set yourself
Because
up for.
you were already tapping into a higher vibrational frequency of the times to come, and began generating all that information. And now, not that it wasn't significant before, but now it's going to be applied even greater to more people in the masses.
So talking about something like that with like not necessarily predictions, but setting yourself up for the future. I know that you share a lot of happenings of what you believe. One thing I do is I write down what predictions I think are going to happen just in a notebook, and I don't tell anybody. Do you do something like that too?
Well, I mean,
or any like feelings that you have for like something that's
I
going
put
to
it in
happen
my
in the next
forecast.
6 months.
I put it in my forecast.
Yeah.
You know, and I always emphasize, you know, and I always also like to emphasize that if I ever share something that may appear to be unsettling, I will always offer my suggestions how to counteract any negative outcome of a situation for yourselves personally. Because even, we hear the adage to be in the world and not of it.
Yes.
To just observe what's going on in the outside world, but we have the power to not allow it to have a negative influence over us.
Right. It's okay to be aware.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we don't want to be carrying that around with us and the negative things that come with it, which is what I'm finding that people are doing right now.
Yeah.
But I understand the need to be aware because we need to know what's happening. We don't want to walk around as ignorant beings.
Of course not. But also, too, to that effect, I would suggest to recognize that we only know something when we're told something.
Yes. And you have to look at your sources.
Absolutely. But also, too, you know what? Look at your own life. Look and observe and honor what you're experiencing personally. Yes, we feel that we've, I remember years ago, I mean, I've said this for many years. I've never been one to watch the news.
Yeah.
I remember even as a child, I would yell at my father for watching the news.
Well, it's just the sound in the next room is so
abrasive.
Yeah.
Abrasive. I remember years ago I was sharing that with a friend of mine, and she had said to me, well, I watch the news because I don't want to be misinformed. I said, well, if you're watching the news, you're already misinformed
because they're only showing it from a
small perspective. Do you ever see that illustration, where they're showing like what's actually going on in a little small window there, and that's what they show you on the news?
Yeah. Yeah. It's always doom and gloom.
Of course it is.
And then they'll have one segment about puppies.
I know.
At the very last to balance it. And these puppies were up for adoption.
Yeah, at the very last segment.
Yeah.
But also too, if you're ever watching anything like that, so much is going on everywhere. Like they have the ticker going on the
noise, the loud noises, the breaking news.
It's all creating confusion. It's what's referred to as the confusion technique.
Yeah.
You keep people in a state of confusion, they're not going to be clear and really understand what's going on.
Yeah, it's a marketing tactic.
Of course it is. It's all propaganda.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
But I told a client recently, she's like, I keep focusing on the news and everything that's happening. I'm like, you need to take that observation and not observation, but that focus that you're having on the news and everything around you. And you need to bring it into your immediate life and start looking for the love that you have in your life and the abundance and the gratefulness that you have in your life. Because the more that you focus on all of that, the less that all of that while you're observing and learning about it, it will counteract it.
Yeah. Another going back to the astrology topic, we've heard how Pluto has transited into the sign of Aquarius. It fully went into Aquarius earlier this year, and I was just seeing a lot of posts saying, oh, we're in the age of Aquarius, we're in the age of Aquarius. I'm like, oh, no.
No.
We're not there yet. And again, just another indication of misinformation. But what I'm emphasizing with that is when you talk about love, part of this experience of Pluto transiting into Aquarius, but also specifically because when a planet moves into a sign, how it's going to play itself out and when certain things are going to appear is dependent upon how it's energized and influenced by other points, meaning other planets. And over the next, next couple of years, the alignment specifically between Pluto and Neptune are presenting, and I've talked about this for many years, about being in that place of love and really understanding the power of love. That's one of the most extraordinary opportunities that we can embrace with the Pluto and Aquarius experience, which is preparing us for the age of Aquarius. I mean, no one knows for sure when that's going to be. By my calculations, it may not necessarily be until about 2165, but it doesn't mean that we can't enjoy all those wonderful things.
And start to experience it ourselves.
And what I emphasize with this point that I'm making is for everyone to really understand the power of love. That's really the initial stages of the Pluto and Aquarius cycle of experience, to really understand how to apply the power of love. It's the application. I mean, since it was in 2013 when everyone, and it was another Pluto experience where everyone was given the opportunity to really recognize and know their power and the understanding of really that placement of love. The times that we're in right now is the application of the power of love. First you'll be given the opportunity to become aware of something, then you'll be given the opportunity to apply that knowing, because then you have a whole different dynamic of the experience and your understanding. That's where intelligence comes in. You know, you've heard the difference like between knowledge and intelligence?
Yes.
Okay. Knowledge, you can have a whole bunch of information in your head,
yeah.
but the intelligence is actually the application of that knowledge.
And knowledge, you can learn everything. But
Correct. But if you can't apply it, you're not
then
really
what's the point?
intelligent.
Yeah.
There's no level of intelligence there, you see. But what I'm emphasizing is now is the time to apply that understanding of the power of love. And that will really usher us into the age of Aquarius.
I'm looking far off in a distance because I'm trying to think about what I was doing in 2013.
Okay.
I'm like, what
It'll
was I
come to
doing?
you.
No, I know what I was doing.
That began that
Yeah.
cycle of experience.
And
it has
it-
to do with Pluto.
And it's interesting because it was a very significant end of year because I left a job I was at 6.5 years that I wasn't appreciated at. And I went to a job that I absolutely loved, and it's absolutely being reflected.
But remember how there was that big debacle in December 2012 about the world coming to an end or something?
Oh, yeah. And then, because the Mayan calendar, and then they're like, well, we don't know if the Mayan calendar was right, and the calendars have changed.
Yeah, it was really the beginning of an end of an experience.
It was the end of the world as we know it, just like that
There you
song.
go.
That's
And
what
that-
you need to take from that.
Yeah.
What's that? REM.
REM, the end of the
That
world. as we
REM
know
song.
it.
Like
Yep.
people think like they're always like, oh, this is the end of the world. Yeah, it's the end
No.
of the world of how you're familiar with it.
Yeah. You know, I remember actually lecturing in 2012, and I was addressing the topic of the end of the world.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? When the world comes to an end, or the time for the world to come to an end, it's not going to be in doom and gloom and destruction.
No.
It will be from a place of love.
Well, that's like, you know how they say with the dinosaurs, how they came to an end with doom and gloom and destruction. What do you
Allegedly.
think about? Yeah, I was going to say.
I wasn't there. Were you there?
Well, no. I mean,
Well,
I may
sometimes I
have
think
in a
I've been
different
around-
form.
It may perhaps in a
But
different
I
form.
may have been a dinosaur.
Well, you don't know. But we don't have a conscious recollection of what occurred that time. We weren't here. We only know what, again,
I just
we only know what we're told.
I just thought of that as you said it because, it's like if you watch like The Land Before Time.
Yeah.
And it's like the meteors and the everything, the land all split and they fell and they all
right.
died all at once.
Oh,
and
okay. I'm not discrediting that. So,
No,
all right,
yeah,
just
no.
say, okay, it's a possibility.
I have never thought of it until now that it's like, whoa, did that really happen? Because that's a story
yeah.
that we were told
Of course.
by someone who was not there.
Absolutely.
Of someone
course.
who figured it out scientifically. Any
Allegedly.
and
Allegedly. Again, you know what? I'm not in the lab doing all of this. I don't know.
no, I wouldn't even know how to start.
I know, right? I don't know if people. You know how many times people come up to me over the years and said to me, "Well, you're a psychic. You know everything."
Oh, I love when people ask questions and they're like, "Well, how does this happen?" I'm like, "I don't know. Look it up."
Can you imagine?
Like, think about it. I don't know everything.
But can you imagine the responsibility of knowing everything and how overwhelming that is?
I don't think I would leave my house,
I know, right?
especially if everybody else knew I knew everything.
Exactly. Yeah, seriously. But
I don't want to be that accurate.
No.
Leave me alone.
no. Like I said, the responsibility. But my goodness, and that also says that we don't have nobody has a free will,
And
we
it's
have
also-
this superpower.
Yeah, and it's also, you know how some people are like, "Well, you said this was going to happen, but it didn't happen like that." I'm like,
Yeah, because you have a free will.
you did something and something changed. It's
you have
free
a
will.
free
It's
will.
only accurate right at that moment.
in that moment, and
And
even
that's it.
then,
You could walk out the door and everything changes.
I've said in my book that if actually in chapter 3 of my book, if we allowed ourselves to acknowledge and honor and recognize every thought we had in every moment of every day, we would see exactly how we've created our lives.
Yeah.
But that requires accountability and being responsible.
Yes. Oh, I definitely know I've created
Oh, there's no doubt
in
my
every
There's no doubt in my
aspect
mind.
the
I've seen
imbalance, the balance.
the bad and the indifferent.
I blame everything on myself now.
Yeah.
There's no outside.
Well, you honor.
Yes, I
You
honor.
You honor the
acknowledge-
power of your being.
I acknowledge that I built this life for myself,
There you
brick
go.
by brick.
Yeah. You know, with astrology, I always say that we have chosen the moment that we're coming into this birth.
Yes.
Those alignments. However, I observe that as being the colors on an artist palette. we choose those colors before we come here, but what we're going to paint with all those colors
We
is
don't
being
know.
defined moment by moment by moment.
Yeah.
And that goes back to knowing your power and that we are the master of our destiny.
I like that.
Did you have any other questions for me? I think I covered a lot of my topics and more, and I think I'm getting ready for the next segment.
No, I mean, it's like 40 minutes. We're good.
Oh my heaven! Look, it's 11:11.
It goes so. And with that, I am going to thank you again, Ray, for
my
joining
pleasure.
me.
My pleasure.
And again,
My pleasure.
remind us how we can find you.
Go to my website, astrologerray.com. There's all my consultation information there, as well as my forecast, some information about my book, and a few, other tidbits as well. So
I still keep thinking you say four cats every time you say forecasts. But anyhow,
I gotta look for a different word.
thank you guys so much for joining me again, and I will see you soon.